The settlers left Machan, Washington in the cabin with 3 days of hardtack and a bucket of water, her crushed legs twisted beneath a moth-eaten blanket. The last wagon had disappeared into the mountain mist an hour ago, maybe 2. Time moved differently when death kept you company. She pressed her palm against the cracked window glass. The cold bit through her skin. Down the slope, wheel ruts carved the mud where her future husband had turned his oxen around. Silas Reed hadn't looked back, not once. The hardtack sat on the wooden table beside a stub of pencil and torn paper. 3 days. They'd calculated her death down to the meal. Machan pulled herself upright against the cabin wall. The movement sent lightning through her spine. Her legs lay useless foreign things that belonged to someone else now. The wagon wheel had seen to that. Crushed bone and torn flesh wrapped in strips of her own petticoat. She reached for the water bucket. Her fingertips grazed the rim before her strength gave out. The bucket sat there, mocking her. 2 feet might as well have been 2 miles. The pencil felt heavy in her hand. She smoothed the paper against her thigh. The words came slowly. Asterisk, to whoever finds this cabin. My name is Machan, Washington. I came west from Charleston as a mail-order bride. The wagon overturned in Devil's Canyon 3 days past. The settlers saved what they could. They could not save me. Asterisk, her hand trembled. The pencil scratched against rough paper. Asterisk, I do not fault them their choice. The frontier takes what it will. I pray whoever reads this knows I died free. Asterisk, thunder rolled across the mountain peaks. The storm had been building since dawn, purple clouds swelling against the tree line. Rain would come soon, then snow. Winter was closing its fist around the high country. She folded the letter and placed it on the table. The hardtack could wait. Dying was hungry work, but she wouldn't rush toward it. The door exploded inward. A mountain of a man filled the doorframe, water streaming from his coat. His shoulders nearly touched both sides of the entrance. Dark hair hung wet across his face. He stepped inside and stopped dead. Sweet Mary. His voice was rough granite. You're alive. Mitchen's hand moved instinctively toward the knife at her belt. Gone. Everything useful was gone. The man closed the door behind him and stood dripping on the cabin floor. His eyes took in the hardtack, the water bucket, her twisted legs. Understanding dawned across his weathered face. They left you. She lifted her chin. They made a practical choice. Practical, he spat the word. That what we're calling it? He moved toward her with surprising gentleness for such a large man. His boots made no sound on the wooden floor. Up close, she could see the gray threading through his dark beard, the lines around his eyes that spoke of too much sun and too little sleep. My name's Arthur Morgan. I work the timber up the ridge. He knelt beside her, careful to keep his distance. What's your name? Machan, Washington. Miss Washington. I need to look at your legs. She pulled the blanket tighter. There's nothing to see, nothing to fix. Let me be the judge of that. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking her injuries without causing more pain. The touch was clinical, gentle. Too gentle for a man who split logs for a living. You've got breaks, bad ones, but the bleeding stopped. He sat back on his heels. You're not dying today. The settlers disagreed. The settlers were cowards. He stood and walked to the fireplace. Within minutes, flames crackled against the stone. The warmth reached her slowly, working through layers of cold and shock. Arthur pulled supplies from his pack, medical supplies. Clean bandages. A bottle of something that smelled sharp and medicinal. You a doctor? I know enough. He worked in silence, cleaning and rebandaging her wounds. His hands were steady, sure. This wasn't his first time setting bones or tending injuries. The questions piled up in her mind, but she held them back. Whatever Arthur Morgan was, he wasn't rushing to explain himself. Winter's coming early this year. He tied off the last bandage. Storm tonight, then snow. Won't clear until spring. I understand. Do you? He met her eyes. Because I'm not leaving you here to die. The offer hung in the air between them. She studied his face, looking for the catch. There was always a catch. Why? Because leaving you would be wrong. Simple words. Too simple. Men didn't risk their lives for strangers without reason. Especially not for a colored woman whose own intended husband had driven away. I don't need charity. Good, because I'm not offering any. He stood and moved toward the door. I'm offering partnership. Partnership? You're educated. I can hear it in your voice. You're strong, or you'd be dead already. He paused with his hand on the door latch. I live alone up here. Could use someone who can. Think. I can't walk. Don't need you to walk. Need you to survive. He stepped back into the rain. Through the window, she watched him unhitch his horse and lead it toward the lean-to behind the cabin. The animal was well fed, well cared for. A man who tended his horse properly might tend other things the same way. Arthur returned with saddlebags and tools. He moved around the cabin with purpose, checking the roof, testing the door frame, examining the stone chimney, making plans. This place will do. He set his pack on the table beside her letter. Needs work, but it'll hold against winter. Michan looked at the letter she'd written. Her death notice. It seemed smaller now, less final. What would this partnership involve? I build, you plan, I hunt. You cook, we both survive until spring, and then? Spring's a long way off. We'll figure it out when we get there. The fire popped and hissed. Outside, the storm was building strength. Soon the mountain passes would be closed. Anyone who wanted to leave would need to go now. Arthur wasn't leaving. She folded the letter and tucked it into her dress. Maybe she'd need it later. Maybe she wouldn't. I accept your partnership, Mr. Morgan. He nodded once, as if he'd expected. Nothing else. Good. We start tomorrow. Arthur's hands moved across the broken wagon wheel with the precision of a craftsman. He'd dragged the wreckage from Devil's Canyon at dawn, metal rim gleaming with morning frost. Now the wheel lay in. Pieces beside the cabin, transformed into something new. Michan watched from the doorway. Her legs were wrapped in fresh bandages, the pain manageable now. Arthur worked without speaking, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Each strike of his hammer rang clear against the mountain silence. The chair took shape slowly. Wagon spokes became armrests. The metal rim, beaten straight and true, formed two perfect circles. Arthur's hands knew their work. Too well for a simple lumberjack. You've built these before. She spoke the words carefully, testing their weight. Arthur's hammer paused mid-swing. Built what needed building. The answer carried shadows, questions that wouldn't be asked. Not yet. By afternoon, the wheelchair was ready. Arthur lifted her into it with the same careful gentleness he'd shown her wounds. The seat was padded with deer hide, soft against her back. The wheels turned smooth and silent. She pushed herself forward. The chair responded, carrying her across the cabin floor. Freedom, measured in feet and inches. Try the door. The threshold was narrow, but the chair fit through. Outside, the mountain air bit her lungs. She breathed it deep, tasting pine and snow and possibility. Arthur had built more than a chair. He'd built her a way back into the world. The days fell into rhythm. Arthur chopped wood and mended the cabin's roof. Michan learned to navigate the chair across rough ground, building strength in her arms and shoulders. They spoke little, but their silences were comfortable, filled with the sound of work and weather. She found his Confederate coat on a Tuesday. The shed behind the cabin held tools and supplies. She'd gone looking for fishing line, thinking to mend a torn shirt. The coat hung in the shadows, gray wool faded to ash. The brass buttons caught what light filtered through the gaps in the walls. Her fingers traced the fabric. Smooth wear. It had been worn, rough where weather had found it. This was old wool, cut for a different man in a different time. She lifted the coat toward the light. The bullet hole was small, neat, just below the left shoulder. Someone had tried to kill the man who wore this coat. They'd missed. She folded the coat carefully and hung it back in the shadows. Some secrets kept themselves. That night, Arthur woke screaming. The sound cut through the cabin walls, raw and animal. Machan pushed herself upright, reaching for the rifle Arthur had taught her to load. The screaming stopped as suddenly as it had begun. She waited in the darkness, listening. The mountain held its breath. Arthur's voice came soft through the wall. "Sorry, just dreams. We all have dreams. Not like mine." The conversation ended there, but sleep was slow to return for both of them. The nightmares came twice more that week. Always the same pattern. The scream, the silence, the quiet apology. Arthur's face grew drawn, his hands less steady. Whatever lived in his dreams was feeding on him. Machan began leaving hot coffee by his door each morning. He never mentioned it, but the cup was always empty when she collected it. Small gestures, careful kindness, the language they'd learned to speak together. She was getting stronger. The chair had become part of her, responsive to her will. She could hunt now, sitting motionless for hours beside the stream while trout moved in the clear water. Her aim was true, her patience endless. Arthur watched her work with something approaching wonder. She'd catch him staring sometimes, a soft expression on his weathered face. He'd look away quickly, as if caught in some private sin. The attraction built slowly, layered beneath their practical partnership. It lived in the way Arthur's hands lingered when he helped her from the chair, in the way Mitchen's eyes followed him as he worked, in the careful distance they maintained, as if touching might break something fragile. Winter pressed closer. The morning frost stayed later each day. Soon the passes would close, sealing them into their mountain sanctuary. Together, Arthur began teaching her to shoot. Not just the fishing bow, but the rifle, the pistol. His hands covered hers, guiding her grip, adjusting her stance. The contact was electric, dangerous. Why do I need to know this? Because I won't always be here to protect you. The words hit harder than he'd intended. Mitchen's hands stilled on the rifle stock. You planning to leave? I'm planning for you to survive. She turned to face him, the rifle forgotten. With or without you? Arthur's jaw tightened. With or without anyone? That night, she dreamed of the wagon accident. The wheel catching in the canyon rocks. The moment of weightlessness before the world turned upside down. But in the dream, she was alone in the wreckage. Arthur was gone, faded into mist and memory. She woke to the sound of hammering. Arthur was working by lantern light, reinforcing the cabin's walls, preparing for winter's siege. Can't sleep? He didn't turn around. Work needs doing. She pulled herself into the chair and joined him. The lumber was cold under her hands, but the work was warming. Side by side, they built their fortress against the coming storm. The first snow fell on a Thursday. Fat flakes that caught the morning light and transformed the mountain into something magical. Machan watched from the cabin window, her breath fogging the glass. Arthur stood in the doorway, coffee steaming in his hands. Beautiful, isn't it? Deadly, too. Most beautiful things are. She felt his eyes on her then, heavy with meaning. The attraction between them had become undeniable, a current that charged the air whenever they were close. But walls remained, secrets that kept them apart even as they drew together. That evening, Arthur sat by the fire cleaning his rifle. The weapon was well maintained, familiar in his hands. Military familiar. You were a soldier. It wasn't a question. Arthur's hands stilled on the gun barrel. Most men were one side or the other. Which side? The silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees, carrying winter's promise. Does it matter? It might. Arthur set the rifle aside and stared into the flames. I fought for the South. The words hung in the air, heavy with history. Machan felt the world shift beneath her, foundations cracking. She'd suspected, but hearing the truth was different. I see. Do you? She studied his face in the firelight. The lines around his eyes, the weight he carried in his shoulders. This was a man haunted by more than dreams. I see enough. They went to bed in separate silences. But the confession had changed something between them. The careful distance they'd maintained was no longer enough. Truth had a way of demanding more truth. The storm hit 3 days later. Wind and snow that turned the world white and wild. They huddled by the fire, trapped together in their small sanctuary. The cabin walls groaned against the gale, but Arthur's work held strong. Machan mended clothes while Arthur sharpened tools. Domestic tasks that felt charged with unspoken tension. They were playing house, she realized. Pretending to be something they weren't, or maybe something they could never be. Tell me about before. She spoke without looking up from her sewing. Before the war. Arthur's whetstone paused against the axe blade. Nothing worth telling. I'll be the judge of that. I was different then, younger, stupider. We all were, he resumed, sharpening, the rhythm hypnotic. I believed in things, causes, honor, the righteousness of my people. And now I know better. The storm raged for 3 days. When it finally passed, they emerged to find the world transformed. Snow covered everything, deep and trackless. They were truly alone now, cut off from the world below. Arthur stood in the doorway, surveying their white prison. Spring's a long way off. Machan joined him, her chair wheels. Leaving tracks in the fresh snow. We'll manage, will we? She looked at him then, really looked. Saw the fear beneath his calm exterior. Not fear of the weather or the isolation. Fear of himself. Of what he might do or say or feel during the long months ahead. We'll manage together. The promise hung between them, fragile as ice. They had each other now, for better or worse. The mountain had made the choice for them. The nightmares grew worse with the deep cold. Arthur's screams echoed through the queue. Cabin walls 3 nights running, each one more desperate than the last. Machan found herself lying awake, listening for the sound of his breathing to steady. On the 4th night, she wheeled her chair to his door. Arthur. The thrashing stopped. Heavy breathing filled the silence. I'm here. I know. His voice was raw. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be honest. The door opened slowly. Arthur stood in the doorway, sweat beading his forehead despite the cold. His hands shook against the doorframe. You don't want to hear it. I want to hear everything. He sat heavily on the chair across from her. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across his face. In the dim light, he looked older, worn down by whatever lived in his dreams. I killed children. The words fell between them like stones into still water. Machan felt her breath catch, but she didn't move, didn't speak. There was a school, a plantation school where they taught. Freed slaves to read. My unit got orders to shut it down. Arthur's hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. Said it was making them uppity, dangerous. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind howled through the pines. We went at dawn. Surrounded the building. The teacher was a young man, couldn't have been more than 20. He came out with his hands up, begging us not to hurt the children. Arthur's voice cracked. He stopped, gathering himself. My captain shot him where he stood. Then he ordered us to burn the school, with the children inside. Machan's world tilted. The cabin walls seemed to press closer, the air thinner. I followed orders, set the fire, watched the smoke rise. Arthur looked up at her then, his eyes hollow. Some of them got out, most didn't. How many? 12 children. Ages 6 to 14. The number hung in the air, a weight that pressed against her chest. 12 children, burned alive for the crime of learning to read. There was one boy. Arthur's voice was barely a whisper. Maybe 8 years old. He made it to the window. Called for his mama. I could have helped him. Should have. What did? You do? Nothing. I did nothing. Machan closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her lids, she saw a face. Young. Eager. Full of questions about the world beyond their small plantation. What was his name? The boy? I don't know. Why? My brother. He was 8 when he died, in a school fire. The silence stretched between them, heavy with understanding. Arthur's face went white. What was his name? Samuel Washington. Arthur's hands covered his face. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. He had a scar on his left hand, shaped like a crescent moon. Cut himself whittling when he was 6, I remember. Arthur's voice was muffled. I remember the scar. The truth settled over them like ash. The man who had saved her life had taken her brother's. The man she had learned to trust, to care for, to love, was the reason Samuel had never come home. Machan felt something break inside her chest, not her heart. Something deeper. The foundation upon which she'd built her new life crumbled into dust. He used to write me letters. Samuel did, every week, telling me about his lessons. About the books he was reading. Her voice was steady, controlled. The letters stopped coming in September 15th. You remember the date? I remember everything. Arthur looked up at her then, his face streaked with tears. I've carried it with me every day since. The sound of his voice. The way he reached for the window. But you didn't help him. No, I didn't help him. The fire burned lower, shadows, dancing across the walls. Outside, the wind carried the scent of snow and pine, and something else. Something that smelled of burning. Why? The word came out cracked, broken. Why didn't you help him? Because I was a coward. Because I was afraid of my captain, afraid of breaking ranks, afraid of being called a traitor. Arthur's hands fell to his sides. Because I thought my orders mattered more than a child's life. They were just children. I know. They weren't soldiers. They weren't threats. They were babies learning their letters. I know. Machan's hands gripped the arms of her chair. The wood was smooth, worn by Arthur's careful craftsmanship. The same hands that had set fire to her brother's school had built her a way to move. Through the world. How long have you known? Since the first night, you have his eyes, his stubborn chin. Arthur wiped his face with the back of his hand. I recognized you. And you said nothing. What could I say? That I was sorry? That I regretted it? Words don't bring back the dead. No, they don't. The silence stretched between them, filled with ghosts. Samuel's face floated in the firelight, young and trusting. He'd believed in the goodness of the world, in the power of learning, in the promise of freedom. Arthur had taken all of that away. I came to these mountains to die. Arthur's voice was flat, empty. Figured I'd work until my body gave out, pay penance with my hands. But you didn't die. No, I kept living, kept breathing, kept waking up every morning with his face in my mind. Machan pushed herself back from the fire. The heat felt wrong now, tainted with memory. She could smell smoke in the air, hear the crack of burning wood. I want you to leave. Arthur nodded slowly. I understand. In the morning, as soon as the sun rises. The passes are closed. The snow is too deep. I don't care. You'll die without help. The supplies won't last until spring. That's my choice to make. Arthur stood, his movements heavy with exhaustion. I won't let you die. You don't get to decide that. Not anymore. I saved you. You destroyed me first. The words hit him. Like a physical blow. He stepped back, his face crumpling. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I can't undo what I did, but I can't let you die because of it. You already let me die 8 years ago when you burned my brother alive." Arthur's hands hung at his sides, useless. "What do you want? From me? I want you gone. I want you to take your guilt and your nightmares and your careful kindness and disappear. And if I refuse?" Mitchan's hand moved to the rifle Arthur had taught her to use. The weapon was clean, well-maintained. "Ready. Then I'll make you go." Arthur looked at the gun, then at her face. He saw the truth there, cold and final. The woman who had learned to survive in a wheelchair could survive without him too. "I'll leave supplies. Enough to last until spring." "I don't want your supplies. Take them anyway, for Samuel." The name hung between them, a bridge and a wall. Arthur moved toward the door, then stopped. "He was brave, your brother. Even at the end he was brave. Don't. He deserved better. He deserved to live." Arthur nodded once, a sharp jerk of his head. Yes, he did. He left without another word. Mitchan sat by the dying fire, listening to his footsteps on the cabin floor. The sound of packing, the creak of the door, then silence. She wheeled herself to the window and watched him disappear into the trees. The snow swallowed his tracks, erasing him from the landscape. Soon it would be as if he had never existed. But Samuel was still dead, and she was still alone. The fire burned down to embers. The cabin grew cold. Outside, the wind carried the sound of winter's promise. Spring was still months away. She might not live to see it. But she would die free. Free of Arthur Morgan and his guilt in his careful hands. Free of the man who had saved her life and taken her brother's. Free to remember Samuel as he had been. Young and eager and full of hope, the embers faded to ash. The cabin settled into darkness, and Mitchan Washington sat alone with her ghosts, waiting for whatever came next. Arthur left the supplies on the cabin porch at dawn. Sacks of flour and beans, salt pork wrapped in cloth, ammunition for the rifle. He worked in silence, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Mitchan watched from the window. She didn't open the door, didn't acknowledge his presence. The glass between them might as well have been a mountain. He finished stacking the supplies and stood for a moment, looking at the cabin. His home for months, the place where he'd learned to hope again. Now it was just wood and stone, empty of meaning. Arthur shouldered his pack and walked into the trees. The snow swallowed his footprints within hours. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Mitchan had grown accustomed to the sound of his breathing, his footsteps, the quiet way he moved through the world. Now there was only the wind and the creak of settling wood. She brought the supplies inside because leaving them to freeze would be wasteful. Samuel had been raised not to waste food. The thought of him made her chest tight, but she held on to it anyway. The days blurred together. She maintained the fire, cooked simple meals, kept the rifle clean and ready. The work was familiar now, routine. She'd learned to survive in Arthur's shadow. Now she would learn to survive in his absence. The loneliness was a living thing, pressing against her ribs. She found herself speaking to the empty air, carrying on conversations with ghosts. Samuel answered back sometimes, his voice young and eager in her memory. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The snow piled higher against the cabin walls, sealing her into a world of white silence. She rationed the supplies carefully, making them stretch. Spring felt like a lifetime away. On the 4th week, she found the first gift. A rabbit hung from the cabin's eaves, freshly killed and cleaned. The meat was still warm, steam rising from the carcass in the cold air. She scanned the tree line but saw nothing. No tracks in the snow, no sign of the hunter. But she knew Arthur was still out there, watching over her from a distance. The knowledge made her angry and grateful in equal measure. More gifts appeared. Fish laid on the porch step, firewood stacked beside the door. Once, a pair of fur-lined gloves that fit her hands perfectly. He was taking care of her still, even in exile. She wanted to refuse his offerings, wanted to throw them back into the snow and declare her independence. But the mountain winter was merciless. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. The gifts came with no words, no attempts at contact. Arthur had become a ghost, present but untouchable. She began to understand the weight of his guilt, the way it had driven him to these mountains in the first place. But understanding didn't mean forgiveness. The spring thaw began in March. Ice cracked along the stream banks. Water ran beneath the snow, carving hidden channels. The world was waking up, but slowly, carefully. Michan ventured outside more. Often, her chair wheels cutting tracks in the softening snow. The fresh air felt like freedom after months of confinement. She was alive. She had survived. The first strangers appeared on a Tuesday morning. 3 men on horseback, picking their way down the mountain trail. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the landscape with professional interest. These weren't trappers or prospectors. They wore good clothes, carried clean weapons. City men with frontier business. The lead rider was older, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He dismounted near the cabin and approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, miss. Name's Dutch van der Linde. We're looking for Arthur Morgan." Michan kept her hands visible, away from the rifle propped beside her chair. "He's not here." But he was. "Recently, I'd say." Dutch's gaze took in the cabin, the supplies, the carefully maintained clearing. Arthur always did have a talent for making himself useful. "What do you want with him?" "Old business. The kind that follows a man no matter how far he runs." The other 2 riders flanked Dutch, their hands resting on their gun butts. Not a threatening gesture, but not a friendly one either. "I told you, he's not here." "No, but you are. And that's interesting in itself." Dutch studied her face, the wheelchair, the defiant set of her shoulders. Arthur always did have a soft spot for strays. The insult was delivered with casual cruelty. Michan felt her temper flare but kept her voice level. "State your business or move on." "My business is with this mountain. These trees. The timber rights that belong to me." Dutch pulled a folded document from his coat. Legal and proper, signed by the territorial governor himself. Michan took the paper with steady hands. The language was formal, full of legal phrases, but the meaning was clear. Dutch van der Linde claimed ownership of the entire mountain, including the cabin where she sat. "This is Arthur's land. Arthur's a squatter, always has been. Living on property that isn't his, taking what doesn't belong to him." Dutch's smile widened. "Sound familiar?" "I don't believe you." "Believe what you like. I'll be back in a week with a crew. We'll be clearing this section for timber. You'll want to be gone by then. And if I'm not, then you'll be gone anyway. One way or another." The threat hung in the air, polite but unmistakable. Dutch remounted his horse and tipped his hat. "Give Arthur my regards when you see him. Tell him old debts have a way of coming due." The 3 riders disappeared up the trail, leaving Michan alone with the legal document and a growing sense of dread. She read the paper again, looking for loopholes, inconsistencies, anything that might invalidate Dutch's claim. The document looked official. Government seals, proper signatures, dates that lined up with territorial law. But something felt wrong. The timing was too convenient, the language too broad. That evening, she built a signal fire on the ridge above the cabin. The flames reached high into the darkening sky, visible for miles. If Arthur was watching, he would see it. He would know she needed him. She waited by the fire until the wood burned down to coals. No answer came from the darkness. Either Arthur was too far away to see the signal, or he was choosing not to respond. The next morning, she found him sitting on the cabin porch. He looked thinner, weathered by weeks of living rough. His clothes were patched and worn. But his eyes were clear, alert. The nightmare seemed to have left him, replaced by something harder. "Saw your fire." Dutch van der Linde came by. Arthur's jaw tightened. What did he want? "He claims to own the mountain. Says you're a squatter. He's a liar. He has papers. Government papers." Arthur stood slowly, his movements careful. "He's still a liar." Machan handed him the document. Arthur read it with the focused attention of a man who'd seen official lies before. "This is garbage. Forged signatures, backdated seals." Dutch always was good at making fake papers look real. "Can you prove it?" "Maybe, but not from here." Arthur folded the paper and handed it back. "We'd need to get to the territorial office. Check the real records." "We?" The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Arthur met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "This is your home now. Worth fighting for, is it? Or are you just looking for another chance to play hero?" "I'm looking for a chance to do right. You can't undo what you did." "No, but I can stop Dutch from taking what's yours." Machan studied his face, looking for traces of the man who had saved her, the man who had destroyed her brother, the man who had learned to live with both truths. "Why should I trust you?" "Because you need help, and because I'm all you've got." The honesty was brutal, uncompromising. Arthur wasn't asking for forgiveness or offering false promises. He was stating facts. Dutch said he'd be back in a week. "Then we have a week to figure out how to stop him." "And after that?" "After that, we'll see." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than facing Dutch alone. Machan looked at the cabin, at the life she'd built from the ruins of her old one. Worth fighting for, Arthur had said. Maybe he was right. "A week then." Arthur nodded once. "A week." He walked to the edge of the clearing and stood looking down the mountain trail. Dutch would return with more men, more weapons, more lies dressed up as law. But Arthur had survived worse odds before. And this time, he wouldn't be fighting alone. Arthur spread the forged documents across the cabin table, his fingers tracing the government seals. The paper felt wrong beneath his touch. Too new. Too clean for something supposedly filed months ago. Dutch always was particular about his forgeries. Good enough to fool most folks, but not good enough to fool you. "I've seen his work before." Arthur's voice carried old bitterness. Back during the war, he made a fortune selling fake Confederate bonds to desperate widows. Machan leaned forward in her chair, studying the documents. The signatures were perfect, the language official. But Arthur's certainty was absolute. "You worked with him. I worked for him. There's a difference." "Is there?" Arthur's hands stilled on the paper. "I thought so at the time." The admission hung between them, another piece of his fractured past. Machan was beginning to understand the weight Arthur carried. Not just Samuel's death, but a lifetime of choosing wrong. "Tell me about Dutch." "He's a war profiteer." "Sold." Weapons to both sides, information to whoever paid best. After the war, he moved into land speculation. Finds veterans with valuable property, creates legal problems they can't afford to fight. And you helped him. "I was young. Needed work. Told myself I was just following orders." Arthur's laugh was bitter. "Seems to be a pattern with me." Outside, the mountain wind picked up, rattling the cabin windows. Spring was coming, but slowly. The passes would be clear soon, bringing more of Dutch's men. How many will he bring? Depends on how badly he wants this mountain. The timber rights alone are worth thousands. Add in the mineral claims, the water rights. Arthur shrugged. "He'll bring as many as it takes. We can't fight an army. We don't need to fight them. We need to expose them." Arthur pulled out a piece of paper and began sketching. His hands moved with practiced precision, mapping the mountain trails, the creek beds, the hidden valleys only he knew. There's a telegraph office in Cedar Ridge. 2 days' ride if we push hard. We get there, send word to the territorial capital, have them check the real records. Dutch will be watching the trails. Not all of them. Arthur's pencil traced a path through the high country, following deer tracks and game trails invisible to casual observation. The route would be treacherous, especially with Mitchen's chair. I can't make that ride. You won't have to. There's another way. Arthur's plan was simple in its audacity. While Dutch expected them to run or hide, they would attack his credibility directly. Expose the forged documents before Dutch could use them. I'll take the papers to Cedar Ridge, send them to the territorial office by wire. Once they're examined by real officials, Dutch's claim falls apart. And if something happens to you, then you signal the authorities when Dutch returns. Tell them you're being evicted illegally. Make them prove their claim in court. It was a desperate plan, built on hope and timing, but it might work. If Arthur could reach Cedar Ridge undetected, if the territorial office acted quickly, if Dutch didn't simply ignore the law entirely. There's something else. Arthur's voice was careful, measured. Dutch knows about you. About us. He'll use that against us if he can. What do you mean? A white man and a colored woman living alone. Together, people will assume things. Dutch will make sure they do. The ugly truth settled over them. Their partnership, born of necessity and survival, would be twisted into something shameful. Used as a weapon against them both. Let them assume. It could destroy any chance we have of legal protection. Then we'll face it together. Arthur looked up from his sketching, surprised by the steel in her voice. Mitchen met his gaze steadily. I'm tired of being afraid of what people think. Tired of hiding. If we're going to fight Dutch, we fight as equals. Even knowing what I did, what I am, I know what you were. I'm choosing to see what you're becoming. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Forgiveness, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. Arthur felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the rope that had bound him for so long. I don't deserve your trust. Maybe not, but you have it anyway. They worked through the night, planning routes and contingencies. Arthur would leave at dawn, following the high trail that skirted the worst of the mountain passes. Mitchen would remain at the cabin, maintaining the appearance of normal life. If Dutch arrived before Arthur returned, she would delay him. Ask for more time to gather her belongings. Play the helpless invalid if necessary. Anything to buy Arthur the hours he needed. What if he doesn't believe the act? Then we improvise. Dawn came gray and cold. Arthur saddled his horse in the pre-dawn darkness, his movements economical and silent. The forged documents were wrapped in oilcloth, protected against weather and discovery. Mitchen watched from the cabin doorway, her rifle across her lap. The weapon was loaded and ready. If Dutch came early, she would be prepared. How long? 3 days. Maybe 4 if the weather turns. And if you don't come back? Arthur swung into the saddle, his horse dancing beneath him. Then you'll know. I failed. No. Mitchen's voice was firm. If you don't come back, I'll know you died trying to do right. The words hit Arthur harder than any blessing. He touched the brim of his hat and rode into the trees, following paths only he knew. Mitchen returned to the cabin and began her vigil. She cleaned the rifle, organized supplies, prepared simple meals she barely tasted. The waiting was harder than the winter isolation. Then, she'd been alone by choice. Now, she was alone by necessity. On the second day, she spotted movement on the far ridge. Riders picking their way down the mountain trail. Too distant to identify, but their purpose was clear. Dutch had returned ahead of schedule. She counted 5 men, all armed, all moving. With military precision. Dutch rode at the front, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. Behind him came his lieutenants, hard men with cold eyes and quick hands. They approached the cabin slowly, weapons ready but not drawn. Dutch dismounted 20 feet from the porch, his hands visible and empty. A gesture of false courtesy. "Miss Washington, I trust you've had time to consider my offer." "I've had time to consider your lies." Dutch's smile didn't waver. "Strong words from a woman in your position." "My position is clear. This is my home. You're trespassing." "Actually, I'm conducting business on my own property." Dutch pulled out the forged documents. Everything legal and proper. "Those papers are fake, are they?" "That's a serious accusation." Dutch's voice hardened. "I'd be careful about making claims you can't prove." The other riders spread out, surrounding the cabin, not threatening, but ready. Machan felt the weight of her rifle, the distance to the door. She was outnumbered, outgunned, but not outmatched. "I've seen those papers. Examined by experts. They're worthless." Dutch's composure cracked slightly. "What experts?" "The Territorial Office. They're very interested in your document forgery operation." It was a bluff, but a calculated one. Dutch's reaction would tell her everything she needed to know about Arthur's mission. "You're lying, am I? Then you have nothing to worry about." Dutch's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. Around him, his men tensed, reading the signals. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. "Where's Arthur?" "Gone." "Where?" "Does it matter? He's not here to protect me." "Just like you planned." Dutch smiled, but it was ugly now, predatory. "No, he's not." The threat was unmistakable. Mitchen's finger found the rifle's trigger, her body coiled for action. 5 against 1. Poor odds, but she'd faced worse. "You should know something about Arthur and me." Her voice was conversational, almost casual. "We're not what you think we are." "What are you then?" "We're people who've survived things that should have killed us. We're people who've learned to fight back." Dutch's laugh was harsh. "You think you can fight me? A crippled woman and a broken-down killer? I think we already are." The sound of horses came from the trees behind Dutch's men. Arthur emerged from the shadows, his rifle trained on Dutch's back. He'd returned by a different route, using the mountain's secrets against his enemies. "Hello, Dutch." Dutch's shoulders sagged. He was caught between Arthur's gun and Michan's, his men scattered and exposed. The predator had become the prey. "Arthur, I wondered when you'd show up." "Just in time, looks like." Arthur dismounted, his weapon never wavering. "Got some interesting news from the Territorial Office. Seems they've never heard of you, or your land claims. Paperwork gets lost. Not this time. They're sending a federal marshal to investigate. Should be here tomorrow." Dutch's face went gray. Federal involvement meant serious consequences. Prison, not just fines. The game was over. "You always were too clever for your own good." "Maybe, but this time, it's enough." Dutch's men shifted uneasily, their hands hovering near their weapons. The standoff stretched taut as wire, ready to snap at the first wrong move. Arthur kept his rifle trained on Dutch's spine while Machan covered the flanking riders. "Federal marshal, you said." Dutch's voice was steady, but sweat beaded his forehead. "That's unfortunate. For you, maybe." Dutch turned slowly, his movements deliberate. "You know what happens to deserters, Arthur, even after all these years. I know what happens to war profiteers, too." The threat hung between them, old sins calling to older debts. Dutch had built his fortune on the graves of better men. Arthur had helped him do it. We could work something out. Split the timber rights. Forget the past. The past doesn't forget. Arthur's words carried the weight of Samuel's memory, of 12 children who would never grow old. Some debts couldn't be negotiated away. Machan watched the exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't just about land or money. This was about the war that had shaped them all, the choices that had defined their lives. Your move, Dutch. Dutch's smile was cold, calculating. Actually, I think it's yours. The attack came from the trees behind Arthur. A sixth man, hidden in the shadows, raised his rifle toward Arthur's back. Machan saw the movement, the glint of metal in the fading light. Her chair spun, wheels cutting tracks in the dirt. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the shot echoing across the clearing. The hidden gunman dropped, his weapon spinning. Away into the underbrush. Dutch's men scattered, seeking cover behind trees and rocks. Arthur rolled behind a fallen log, his rifle cracking as he returned fire. The clearing erupted in chaos, muzzle flashes lighting the gathering dusk. But Machan was already moving. The wheelchair that had seemed a liability became her advantage. She rolled between the trees, silent and unexpected, her rifle speaking with cold precision. Dutch's men had planned for a crippled woman and a broken gunfighter. They hadn't planned for a partnership forged in winter's crucible, tempered by shared loss and mutual respect. The fight was brief but decisive. Arthur's knowledge of the terrain combined with Machan's tactical mind created a deadly efficiency. Within minutes, Dutch's men were either down or fleeing into the trees. Dutch himself knelt in the dirt, his hands pressed against a shoulder wound. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark against his white shirt. You always were a better shot than a soldier. Arthur approached cautiously, his weapon ready. Maybe. But I'm learning to be a better man. Pretty words. Won't change what you did. No, but stopping you might balance the scales. Dutch laughed, the sound bitter and broken. The scales don't balance, Arthur. They never do. Maybe not, but I can try. The federal marshal arrived the next morning, a thin man with tired eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen too much. Frontier justice. He surveyed the scene with professional detachment, taking statements and examining evidence. The forged documents were obviously fraudulent under expert scrutiny. Dutch's operation was extensive, involving dozens of fraudulent land claims across 3 territories. The marshal's investigation would take months to complete. You folks did the right thing, the marshal said as Dutch and his surviving men were loaded into a prison wagon. These land frauds are bleeding the territories dry. Arthur nodded but said nothing. Doing right felt strange after so many years of doing wrong. He wasn't sure he trusted the feeling yet. Dutch looked back as the wagon rolled away, his eyes finding Arthur's across the clearing. No words passed between them, but the message was clear. Some wars never ended. Some debts followed a man to the grave. The marshal departed with his prisoners, leaving Arthur and Machan alone in the sudden quiet. The mountains settled around them, peaceful after the storm. It's over. This part is. Arthur stood at the edge of the clearing, looking down the trail where Dutch had disappeared. The victory felt hollow, incomplete. Justice had been served, but the dead remained dead. You saved my life back there. You saved mine first. That doesn't make us even. No, but it makes us partners. The word carried new meaning now. They had faced death together, fought side by side, proven themselves equal to the challenge. The partnership born of necessity had become something deeper. Spring arrived in earnest over the following weeks. The snow melted from the high peaks, revealing green meadows and rushing streams. The mountain world awakened, full of life and possibility. Arthur expanded the cabin, adding rooms and storage. Machan planted a garden, her hands working the rich soil with quiet satisfaction. They were building something permanent, something that would outlast the winter's trials. Travelers began appearing on the mountain trail, drawn by word of the couple who helped those in need. Wounded soldiers, abandoned women, children orphaned by frontier hardship. The cabin became a way station, a place of refuge and healing. Arthur taught the men to work with their hands, to find purpose in honest labor. Machan taught the women to read, to claim their own voices in a world that preferred them silent. Together, they created something new from the ruins of their old lives. The nightmares faded gradually. Arthur's sleep became peaceful, unmarked by the screams of burning children. The guilt remained, but it no longer consumed him. He had found a way to honor the dead through service to the living. Machan kept Samuel's memory alive in the lessons she taught, the books she shared, the fierce protection she offered to those who needed it. Her brother's death had meaning now, transformed into a force for good. On a warm evening in late summer, they sat on the cabin porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with shared understanding. "Do you think we'll ever be whole again?" Arthur considered the question, his hands working a piece of wood into something useful. "Maybe, or maybe we'll just be broken. In better ways. That's enough. Yes, it is." The stars emerged one by one, mapping the darkness with points of light. Below them, the mountains slept peacefully, secure in their protection. They had found their place in the world, their purpose in each other. The past would always be with them, a weight they carried together. But the future stretched ahead, full of possibility and hope. They would face it as they had faced everything else. Together, the mountain wind carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, of new growth and second chances. In the distance, a nightbird sang its ancient song, calling to its mate across the darkness. Arthur and Machan listened to the music of the living world, two broken souls who had learned to heal together. The mountain held them in its embrace, offering sanctuary to those who had found their way home. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.